I was a few days into a solo hiking trip through a stretch of national forest that I'd never explored before. It was one of those long weekends I had taken off work just to get out of town and away from everything. I'd packed light, planned a loop that would take me through about 30 miles of trail over 3 days, and I was carrying everything I needed in my pack: tent, stove, map, food, everything. Nothing fancy, just a bit of solitude and fresh air. It was early fall, and the weather had been holding up. Cool mornings, warm afternoons, and the leaves just starting to turn. I'd seen maybe 2 other hikers that morning, both heading the opposite direction on the trail. After that, it had been hours of walking alone through quiet woods. The trail wound through rolling hills, scattered groves of pine and aspen, and the occasional stretch of open ground where the sun cut through in wide beams. I wasn't in a rush. I stopped often to drink, take pictures, and just enjoy being outside. Around mid-afternoon, I came across a clearing that wasn't marked on my map. It was a flat spot just off the trail, tucked behind a thick patch of trees. I noticed it mostly because I caught a hint of smoke on the breeze, just faint, like someone had put out a fire not long ago. Curious, I stepped off the trail and pushed through a few bushes to get a better look. That's when I saw the campsite. It was small, just a fire ring made of blackened rocks and a single folding chair set off to the side. A battered metal pot sat near the edge of the fire pit, scorched black on the bottom. Smoke still curled up from the coals. It wasn't a heavy fire, not a big campfire like someone would use to cook or stay warm overnight. Just enough to boil water, maybe. Nothing else around. No tent, no pack, no signs of gear or supplies. Just that one chair, the pot, and a fire that had clearly been burning minutes before I got there. At first, I figured someone had just stepped away into the woods, maybe for a bathroom break or to gather more wood. But the longer I stood there, the more wrong it felt. There weren't any fresh signs of someone moving around recently, no paths worn through the grass, no dropped gear. It looked like someone had just vanished. Still, I was tired. I'd been hiking for hours and hadn't sat down once all day. I figured it wouldn't hurt to take a break for a few minutes. I moved over to the chair, set down my pack, and took a seat. It creaked slightly under my weight, like it hadn't been used in a while. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and looked at the fire pit again. That's when I noticed the footprints. The ground around the fire was dirt, dry and packed down, but it held the shape of footprints clearly. What caught my eye wasn't just 1 or 2 prints. It was the pattern. There was a single set of boot prints, maybe size 10 or 11, and they circled the fire ring again and again, dozens of times. I followed the pattern with my eyes, tight loops, never wandering, never straying off in any direction, just around and around. Whoever had been here had walked in a circle around the fire over and over. No path in, no path out, just loops. It hit me all at once, harder than I expected. I stood up immediately, suddenly tense. My skin crawled. I scanned the tree line around the clearing. Everything was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind, just me and that smoking fire. I backed away slowly, trying not to make too much noise as I picked up my pack. My eyes kept darting toward the trees, half expecting someone to step out and say something. But no one did. I turned and walked back the way I came, retracing my steps through the bushes and back onto the trail. My pulse was pounding. I didn't run, I didn't want to, but I walked fast. My mind was racing. Why would someone walk in circles like that? Why no other footprints? Where did they go? Why leave a fire burning and everything else behind? I kept glancing over my shoulder as I walked. The trees felt closer now, the air heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me. Maybe still was. Maybe that's all they'd been doing, waiting to see who would stop. I kept walking, mile after mile. I didn't stop for water, didn't stop to check my map. I just wanted distance between me and that clearing. Eventually the sun started dropping lower, and I realized I needed to find a place to camp before it got dark. I didn't want to, not really. I would have hiked all night if I thought I could make it back to my car. But the loop was long, and I was somewhere near the middle. No shortcut back. I picked a spot just off the trail, a wide clearing with good visibility in all directions. I set up my tent in record time, ate a cold dinner straight from the bag, and kept my flashlight on long after I'd zipped myself inside. I barely slept. Every twig snap, every rustle in the trees outside made my heart jump. I kept thinking about that campsite, about those looping footprints and that fire. It was like someone had been pacing round and round, like they were waiting for something. Or someone. In the morning, I packed up fast and didn't bother with breakfast. I just wanted to finish the loop and get out. I hiked nonstop for hours. My legs burned, but I didn't care. I passed no one, saw no one, just trees and trail and more silence. When I finally reached the parking lot, my car was the only one there. I got in, slammed the door shut, and just sat there for a while before starting the engine. I didn't report what I saw. I don't even know what I would have said. There's no crime in walking in circles or leaving a campfire smoldering. And maybe there was a reasonable explanation for it all. Maybe. But something about that place didn't feel right. The prints, the silence, the way the forest seemed to hold its breath while I stood there. I've hiked a lot of trails over the years, some remote, some popular, but I've never felt that way before. Like I was intruding, like I was being observed, not with curiosity, but with intent. I still hike. I still go out on my own sometimes. But I don't sit at other people's campsites anymore. I don't go off trail unless I absolutely have to. And I don't ignore that feeling in my gut when something feels off. Whatever was going on in that clearing, I don't want to understand it. I just know I left and I didn't look back. And maybe that's why I'm still here to tell the story. I was hiking solo through a maze of red rock canyons in Utah, somewhere south of Escalante, probably 20 miles from the nearest paved road. I'd been out there for 4 days already, working my way through dry washes and narrow slot canyons, living off what I'd packed in: jerky, protein bars, instant rice, and trail mix. The place was dead quiet, like walking on another planet. No trees, no rivers, no animals that I could see. Just sandstone walls in deep shades of orange and red, wind sculpted into smooth curves, and the sky like a giant blue lid over everything. That silence was something I liked about the desert until it started to feel off. I was cutting across a section of slick rock in the late afternoon, maybe 2 hours before sunset, trying to find a flat place to camp. The shadows were getting long, and I was starting to feel that tired, slow burn in my legs that meant it was time to stop. That's when I heard it, this sharp, dry whistling sound. Not a tune, not something drawn out. Just 3 quick, high-pitched bursts. At first, I assumed it was wind catching in a crack or maybe my backpack straps whistling behind me as I walked. I even stopped and turned around, checking my gear. Nothing looked loose or flapping. But then I started walking again. 5 steps later, whistle. The same rhythm. Short, high, clear. I stopped again. Nothing. I stood still for a full minute listening. Just the wind and the distant ticking of heat off the rocks. I chalked it up to my mind playing tricks. Maybe something echoing weird off the canyon walls. I'd been hiking hard for days and hadn't talked to a soul since I parked my truck. Sleep was light out there. Just me in a thin tent under a massive sky, with every creak of fabric and shift of the wind sounding 10 times louder in the dark. I picked a spot on a flat shelf above the wash, slightly elevated, with a bit of a rock overhang behind me to break the wind, and set up camp. I boiled some water and ate my dinner sitting on a rock, watching the sun slide down behind the canyons. I could see for miles in every direction, and I didn't see another soul. When the sky finally went black and the temperature dropped, I crawled into my tent, zipped the bag around me, and lay there listening. It took me longer than usual to fall asleep. I kept thinking about that whistle, how it had followed my steps. Step, step, whistle. Step, step, whistle. Sometime deep in the night, I woke up. No dreams, no sounds. I just woke, eyes open, wide awake all of a sudden. It was pitch black in the tent. My watch said 2:34 a.m. I stayed still listening. At first, I thought I was just spooking myself. That kind of empty silence makes your brain try to fill in the gaps. But after a minute, I heard it again. Not the whistle, something else. Very faint, outside the tent. A crunch, like a foot on sand and gravel. Then nothing. Then again, slow. Crunch, crunch, then silence. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. I wasn't sure if it was an animal, but even a coyote would have moved faster than that. Whatever it was deliberate, careful, like someone walking in a half circle around me. After a few minutes of silence, I finally grabbed my headlamp and clicked it on. I unzipped the tent door just an inch or two and scanned outside. Just rocks and scrub brush. My pack leaning against a rock. Nothing moving, nothing alive. I sat up and listened for another 10 minutes. No more sounds, just wind. Eventually, I lay back down, not even bothering to take off the headlamp. I didn't fall asleep for hours. The next morning, when the sun was up, I crawled out and looked around the camp. About 15 feet from the tent, in the patchy sand between the rocks, I saw the boot prints. Clear as anything. The same kind I made. Probably size 10 or 11. They weren't mine. I had walked into camp from the other direction. These prints made a wide, even arc around the tent. Not close enough to be aggressive, but not random either. They looped around me, then doubled back and circled again. Then they vanished into the slick rock, where footprints don't stick. My mouth felt dry as hell. I stood there staring at them, looking for any sign that I was wrong. But I wasn't. I took pictures, measured my own boot against them. Same size, similar tread, but not mine. Not for me. There was no point yelling out or calling for anyone. Even if someone was there, they were long gone. And in that terrain, sound didn't travel far. The canyons ate it. I packed up faster than usual. I still had a day's hike to my planned exit point, and I didn't want to stay put another minute. For hours, I didn't hear or see anything. I kept looking over my shoulder. I even stopped a few times and checked the sand behind me. Nothing. I camped that night on a high ridge with no cover. Fully exposed. I figured if someone was nearby, I'd rather see them coming than get snuck up on again. I barely slept. Every sound made me flinch. The creak of my tent, the shift of fabric, even the wind scraping against the rocks sounded like movement. I made it back to the trailhead the next afternoon. My truck was still there. No sign anyone had touched it. Driving out, down the long dirt road that cut back to civilization, I kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see someone behind me, on foot or maybe in another vehicle. But it was just me. Always just me. I told myself maybe it had been another hiker. Maybe someone who saw my camp and didn't want to make contact. But why not just say something? Why circle the tent twice and then leave without a word? I never found any more clues. Never saw another footprint. But the whistle still bothers me. The timing of it. The way it answered my steps exactly. The weirdest part is I never saw anyone out there. Not once. Not in the distance, not a shadow, not a voice. Just those prints. And the sound of someone following, too quiet to find. I was hiking alone in a national forest in Colorado. It was early fall, late September, and the air was crisp but not too cold. The leaves had started turning, but most were still clinging to the trees, so the trail was mostly clear. I'd started that morning from the trailhead around 9 a.m., planning to complete a well-marked loop trail that passed through a wide valley and circled back to the parking lot. It was around 11 miles, not too strenuous, and I had more than enough daylight to make it back well before sunset. The trail itself was well-maintained, wide enough for two people to walk side by side, and dotted with wooden markers every half mile or so. I started counting them out of boredom. The terrain didn't change much. Pine trees, patches of aspen, some rocky inclines, nothing unusual. After a while, it all started to blur together. Counting markers gave me something to do. The markers were all the same. Small wooden posts about waist high, with a number carved into the wood and stained a dark brown. Nothing fancy, just practical. I passed marker 39 without much thought. Then 40. Then 41. Around marker 42, I remember starting to feel just a little uneasy, but I couldn't put my finger on why. It wasn't the trail, and it wasn't the surroundings. Maybe it was the quiet. The deeper I got into the valley, the less I heard. No birds, no wind. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, but I shrugged it off. I was alone, miles from the nearest town, surrounded by dense woods. Silence wasn't exactly out of place. Then I reached marker 43. Right away, I noticed it looked wrong. Instead of the number being carved into the wood like the others, it was painted on. White paint, sloppily done. The edges of the numbers were uneven, like someone had done it in a hurry. Underneath the numbers, scratched into the post with something sharp, were the words, "Go back." I just stared at it for a second. I figured it was some kind of prank. People carve stupid stuff into trail signs all the time. I'd seen worse. But the fact that the number was painted instead of carved stuck in my head. It was different. It looked like someone had replaced the original post or covered it up. I looked around, saw nothing but trees and brush. I waited a minute listening. Still nothing. No sounds. Just my own breathing and the slight creak of my pack as I adjusted my shoulders. I kept walking. I don't know how much time passed, 5, maybe 10 minutes, but the trail curved a bit and started gently descending into a lower part of the valley. Then I saw another trail marker up ahead. As I got closer, my stomach dropped. It was 43 again. Same painted numbers. Same warning scratch beneath. Go back. I stood there a long time, just staring at it. I looked behind me, then forward, trying to see if I'd somehow gotten turned around. The trail was one continuous loop. I hadn't turned off, and there hadn't been any forks or alternate paths. I was sure I hadn't backtracked. I walked on quicker now. The trail looked the same in every direction, tall trees, underbrush, rocky soil, but I kept expecting to see something I recognized. Anything that would prove I was making progress. Then I saw it again. Another marker 43. Same exact one. This time I stopped and took out my phone, even though I knew I didn't have service out here. I just needed to look at the time. I had been walking for over half an hour since I first saw marker 43. I should have been at marker 44 by now. I should have passed at least another half mile. But I hadn't. I hadn't seen anything new. I walked faster, almost jogging. My boots hit the ground harder than I meant them to. My pack shifted and bounced with each step. My breathing picked up, more from nerves than from effort. The trail was mostly flat in this section, but it felt like it was closing in. I could see another marker in the distance and stopped in my tracks when I got close. 43, again. Same one. I took a few steps off the trail, just enough to see around some trees, thinking maybe I could spot another path or some landmark to guide me. But all I saw were more trees. Dense pines, too close together to see far. No sounds, no people, no birds, no rustling leaves. Just dead quiet. Something was wrong. I stood there for a minute, then made a decision I never like to make while hiking alone. I left the trail. I turned upslope, pushing through brush and low branches. It wasn't steep at first, but the higher I went, the more rugged it got. There was no path here, just rough terrain and rocks and fallen logs. I kept glancing back, trying to keep track of where I'd come from, but everything looked the same. My legs were burning from the climb, and my hands were scratched up from moving branches out of the way. I didn't care. I needed out. I kept climbing. No breaks. I just kept going. After maybe 40 minutes, the forest started to thin a little, and I saw a break in the trees up ahead. When I got there, I saw gravel. A narrow dirt road. One of those old service roads they use for fire access or maintenance. I stopped right there on the edge, breathing heavy, heart racing. My shirt was soaked with sweat. I followed the road upslope for a bit until I got to a bend with a clearer view. From there, I could just make out the valley below. No obvious trail. No markers. Just trees. I sat down on a flat rock and drank nearly half my water. I felt nauseous. Not from exertion, but from that crawling, sinking feeling that I had been stuck in something. Something deliberate. Something man-made, not supernatural. It didn't feel like I'd gotten lost by mistake. It felt like someone or something wanted me to stay in that loop. Wanted me to keep walking past that same marker, over and over. Eventually, I walked that service road for almost 2 hours before I saw a rusted metal gate and an old Forest Service sign. The paint was peeling, but it was real. Past the gate, the road met up with a gravel parking area with a kiosk and a faded map. It wasn't the same trailhead I'd started from, but I didn't care. I was out. It took me nearly another hour of walking along a paved road to get a bar of cell service. I called a friend who lived about an hour away and waited near the edge of the road. A passing ranger eventually stopped and gave me a bottle of water and waited with me until my friend arrived. When I explained what happened, I left out some of the weirder details. Just said I got turned around, couldn't find the next marker, left the trail. I didn't think they'd believe me anyway. I didn't believe myself. I never reported the marker. I never went back. I don't know if someone had deliberately altered the trail, or if there was some kind of mapping issue, or if I'd gotten caught in a section that had been quietly closed off and rerouted. But the marker wasn't just a mistake. Someone painted that 43. Someone scratched "Go Back" into it. It wasn't old graffiti. It was fresh. I haven't hiked alone since. Not because I'm afraid of the woods, but because I know how fast a normal trail can stop making sense, and how long it can take to get out once it does. I had a few days off work and wanted to get away from everything: phone, people, city noise, all of it. I packed up my gear and drove to a lesser-known trail system in Oregon that I'd read about on a backpacking forum. Nothing official, just a post from some guy who said it was peaceful and lightly trafficked. That sounded perfect. It was tucked a bit off the main roads, maybe an hour or so from any proper town. The parking area was more of a dirt patch off the side of a Forest Service road. No signs, just a narrow path going into the trees. I had downloaded a trail map the night before. It showed a basic loop, around 12 miles total, with a few offshoots that linked back up later. I figured I'd hike in, camp overnight, and finish the loop the next morning. It was supposed to be an easy 2-day hike. I set off mid-morning. The air was cool, trees thick with moss, the ground soft with pine needles. I saw no one. The trail was tight in places, overgrown in others, but it still looked traveled, just not recently. About an hour in, I saw an old wooden sign nailed to a tree, arrow pointing right, burned in letters that read "Ridge Path." It matched the map. I turned and kept walking. The trail climbed slowly and narrowed, weaving through old growth. It was quiet. No wind. No animals. Just the occasional creak of a tree in the distance. Around 2 p.m., I passed a small clearing where someone had built a stone fire ring. That was the last thing that felt normal. An hour later, I started noticing weird things. Another wooden sign, same kind as before, arrow pointing left, labeled Creek Loop. I remembered that name from the map, but it was supposed to be south of me, not this far up. I didn't think much of it. Trails get rerouted, signs moved. I kept going. But then I passed a large tree with a lightning scar down its side, and I got this weird feeling that I'd seen it already. The bark was blackened in a specific way, hard to mistake. I looked at my GPS. No signal. It said searching for location and just spun. I walked a little further, slower this time. 10 minutes later, I passed the same tree again. I was sure of it. I turned around, trying to backtrack, but things didn't look familiar anymore. The path looked the same in every direction, narrow dirt ribbon through endless green. No clear markers, no views, just dense forest. I checked my downloaded map, but it was acting strange. Sections loading blank, and the little blue that marked my position was gone. I kept walking, thinking I'd eventually hit a trail junction or something recognizable. I didn't. Instead, I came across another wooden sign, this one split in half and hanging sideways. The top read "Hill." The bottom had snapped off. The arrow pointed both ways, like someone had twisted it. I stopped and sat on a log, drank some water, and tried to calm myself down. Maybe I'd just missed a turn. Maybe I'd gone in a circle without realizing. I picked a direction and kept walking. The sun dipped low, shadows stretching long and dark across the forest floor. I didn't feel like I was gaining or losing elevation. It just felt flat and endless. Around dusk, I came to a downed tree across the trail. Huge, mossy, with a split in the trunk like someone had hit it with an axe years ago. I stepped over it and walked for another hour. Then I saw it again. Same downed tree, same moss, same split. I stared at it for a long time. I even checked the trunk for a mark. There was a notch shaped like a check mark where the bark had peeled back. I had definitely been here before. I wasn't just lost. I was stuck in a loop. I camped that night just off the trail, far enough into the trees that I could barely see the path. I didn't light a fire, didn't want anyone or anything to see me. I ate a protein bar, drank some water, and lay in my bag listening. There were no forest sounds, just the occasional snap of a branch far off, like someone stepping wrong in the dark. I barely slept, kept thinking I'd wake up to someone standing near the tent. By morning, the GPS was still out. I tried climbing a small ridge nearby, hoping for a signal. Nothing. The trees were too thick. I could see the curve of hills beyond, but no clearings, no roads. I tried to follow the sun, head east, but the canopy was too dense to tell where the sun even was half the time. I ended up back on the trail. Around midday, I passed the downed tree again. That time I laughed, but it wasn't funny. I just sat there, laughing like an idiot until my throat went dry. It made no sense. I had been walking in different directions, taking turns bushwhacking through brush. But no matter what, I ended up back at that tree. I didn't try to figure it out anymore. I just got off the trail entirely. I dropped down into the trees, picked a direction, and started moving straight. No more trails, no more signs. Just raw forest. The brush was thick, full of fallen limbs, spiderwebs, and patches of thorny vines that tore at my legs. I followed a dry creek bed when I found one, figuring water always goes down, and down usually means civilization eventually. The creek bed was narrow and rocky, dry as bone. I slid down a few small drops, tore a hole in my pants, scraped my elbow. My legs were cut and muddy, but I kept going. I didn't stop for long, just drank sparingly from my bottle and moved. That night, I slept in a little dip under some fir trees. No tent, just the bag. I was too exhausted to set anything up, and my head was spinning. I kept jerking awake at every sound: a squirrel, a snapping twig, wind rustling through dead branches. I didn't even know what day it was anymore. Time stretched and collapsed in weird ways. My throat was dry, lips cracked, and I had no idea how far I'd gone. The second morning off trail, I kept following the creek bed. My legs felt like lead. Every step took effort. I was filthy, sweating, dizzy from thirst. My food was gone, just empty wrappers in the side pocket of my pack. And then, near mid-afternoon, I heard it. A low hum, cars. I stopped, heart pounding, and listened hard. It was faint, but it was there. Not wind, not imagination. I moved faster, tripping and stumbling over rocks, slipping in mud. The trees began to thin. Sunlight finally hit my face full on for the first time in what felt like days. I scrambled up a slope and saw it blacktop. A two-lane highway with a bend in the road and a rusted guardrail. I climbed over the rail and just sat there in the gravel shoulder, arms hanging limp, eyes burning. A few cars passed by in the next half hour. I didn't wave them down. I just sat there, collecting myself, trying to figure out how far I was from my car. Eventually, I walked. It took me another few hours to get to a gas station. The clerk looked at me like I'd crawled out of a drain. Dirt smeared across my face, pants shredded, boots soaked through. I asked him where I was. He told me the name of a town I'd never heard of, nearly 40 miles from where I parked. Later, when I got home, I tried to trace where I'd been. I pulled up every map I could find, topo maps, satellite, Forest Service PDFs. But the trail I started on didn't exist on any of them. Not even the trailhead showed up. It was just blank forest. Even the fire ring, the signs I saw, none of it matched any known trail in that region. I don't know who made that path, or why, but someone had. And the signs, those weren't random. Someone placed them. They looked old, but not ancient. And the loop I got stuck in, it wasn't natural. I walked with a compass later, and even when I thought I was changing direction, I wasn't. The trail bent gradually, always leading back. I haven't gone hiking alone since. I still have the GPS, still have the same boots, but I can't bring myself to wear them. I don't know what I found out there, just that it was never meant to be found. I camped alone in the Rockies last October. It was the last weekend I had free before winter hit full force, and I'd been planning this trip for months. I wanted to be deep in the backcountry, completely off the grid, no cell signal, no trails crowded with tourists. Just me, the trees, the cold, and the silence. I picked a spot about 8 miles from the nearest trailhead, high elevation, maybe 9,000 feet or so. The kind of place where most people don't bother going unless they're serious hikers. I brought my gear, a sturdy tent, sub-zero sleeping bag, freeze-dried meals, all the standard stuff. The forecast said it'd be cold, but not brutal, high 40s during the day, mid-50s overnight. I checked multiple times before heading out. I made good time getting in. The first few miles were all steep incline, and my legs were burning by the third hour, but I was too focused on getting away from everything to care. Around late afternoon, I found a little flat patch just off a ridge, nestled between some pines, mostly sheltered from wind. Great view of the valley below. I set up camp there. Dinner was just some packaged chili, heated over my little propane stove. I ate quickly and sat with my back against a tree, watching the light fade. It's funny how quiet it gets once the sun drops in the mountains. No distant cars, no hum of electronics, not even birds after a certain point. Just wind and the occasional crack of a branch settling somewhere out of sight. By 9:30, I was zipped up in my tent, already half asleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up shivering hard. I remember sitting up in my sleeping bag, still mostly zipped, and my first thought was that I'd left the side flap of the tent open. I hadn't. The zipper was fully shut, and there was no draft. I turned on my headlamp and looked around. Frost on the inside of the tent walls. My breath was coming out in thick clouds. I dug around for my little thermometer I keep clipped to my bag, 12 degrees Fahrenheit. I just sat there, confused. That wasn't right. Not even close. The forecast had said mid-50s, maybe 40s if a cold snap came through. But this felt like midwinter cold, like early February, not October. I opened the tent and looked outside. Everything was white. The ground, the trees, even my backpack leaning against a boulder. All coated in frost, not snow, just this glassy layer of frozen moisture. The moon was still out and bright enough that I didn't need my headlamp. I could see my own boot prints from earlier, faint outlines across the white dirt. But what really stopped me cold was about 10 feet from the tent. There was a circle, a dry circle, perfectly round, maybe 7 or 8 feet across, completely free of frost. Just exposed ground and dead pine needles, like nothing had touched it. My first stupid thought was that maybe a big animal had bedded down there. But it was too perfect. No footprints leading in or out. No matted leaves, no fur, no droppings. Just bone-dry earth in a ring of ice. I stood there staring at it, shivering so hard my teeth hurt. After a minute, I walked closer and squatted down to check it out. The ground was warm. Not hot, but definitely radiating heat. And in the very center of the ring was an old fire pit, blackened stones arranged in a circle, bits of charred wood and ash inside. I pressed the back of my hand against one of the stones. Warm. Maybe 90 degrees or so. Still warm enough to steam slightly in the cold air. But here's the thing, I hadn't built a fire. I hadn't even cleared a spot for one. I had a stove, and I'd used it on a flat rock right outside my tent earlier that night. The pit had been there all along, apparently, but I hadn't noticed it when setting up camp, which didn't make sense because I'd walked that exact area, checking for rocks and roots. No way I'd miss something like that. I started feeling this strange tightness in my chest, like I'd missed something obvious, and now it was too late to do anything about it. I didn't like how warm the pit was. I didn't like the frostless ring. I didn't like how silent it was, even for the Rockies. I spent the next hour just sitting in my tent, fully dressed, boots on, knife clipped to my belt. I didn't even try to sleep. I kept hearing these faint popping noises, like ice cracking off branches, but they were too rhythmic, too evenly spaced. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe I was too cold to think clearly. When the first light started to come in, just the faintest glow through the trees, I packed up. I didn't make breakfast. I didn't bother with coffee or even water. I just broke down the tent, stuffed it all in my pack, and got moving. My boots were stiff with frost and my fingers burned from the cold, but I kept walking. About 2 miles down, I stopped to check the GPS and rest a second. I looked back. The sky was pink now, the trees casting long shadows on the snow-dusted ground. In the distance, back toward where I'd camped, I saw a faint column of smoke. Thin and gray, barely visible. I stared at it for maybe a full minute, then turned and kept walking. I didn't stop again until I was back at my truck. Back home, I kept checking weather history for that night. Closest station was about 20 miles out, lower elevation. Said the temperature bottomed out at 38 degrees. No storms, no cold front, nothing unusual reported. I even posted on a hiking forum, just asking if anyone else had experienced sudden cold snaps at higher elevations around that time. A few people said the Rockies could be unpredictable, but nothing sounded like what I saw. A couple weeks later, I went through the photos I'd taken, views from the ridge, my camp setup, even a picture of my stove and dinner from that night. But nothing showed the fire pit, not even in the background. I checked the timestamps. Everything lined up. I'd set up right near where the pit ended up being, and there wasn't even a rock out of place. I haven't been back since. It wasn't ghosts. It wasn't monsters or weird glowing lights. It was something real, something physical. Heat in the ground, frost around it, a fire pit that I didn't build but had clearly been used recently. Someone or something had been there during the night. Something warm enough to keep the snow from forming. Something that left no prints. Something I didn't see. Something that didn't want to be seen. And whatever it was, I don't think it ever left the area. I think it was still there when I walked away. Watching. Waiting. Just far enough outside the circle of frost that I couldn't hear it breathing. I was hiking in Arizona, somewhere in the northeastern part of the state, just south of the Navajo Nation. The land there is a mixture of open desert, cliffs, dry brush, and narrow canyons. That day, I was walking a route I found on an old topographic map, one that followed the rim of a long, unnamed canyon. It wasn't on any park website. No signs, no other people. Just how I liked it. It was late March, still cool in the mornings, and I'd started early. I had about 2 liters of water, some snacks, and a small day pack with the usual first aid kit, flashlight, knife, and a printed map. My goal was to follow the canyon wall for a few miles, cut across a saddle ridge, and loop back through some open desert. I wasn't planning on camping overnight. Just a long day hike. Around midday, the sun was high and sharp. There wasn't much shade, just scattered mesquite and prickly pear. I moved slowly, watching for snakes, and trying not to lose my footing on the loose gravel. The rim path gradually turned rocky, and I started seeing signs of old human activity. Faint chisel marks in the stone, a broken metal pipe half buried in the sand, even what looked like the edge of an old wagon road carved into the slope. About 2 hours in, the trail curved into a sort of notch in the canyon wall. That's when I saw the shelter. It was small and low, built right into the stone wall, like someone had cut a shallow cave and then reinforced it with rock walls. The doorway was just wide enough for a person to enter sideways, with a smooth stone threshold. No door, just a gap in the rock. It blended into the canyon so well that if I hadn't been looking directly at it, I'd have walked past without noticing. Curious, I stepped closer. The entrance was maybe 4 feet wide and 6 feet tall. I leaned in and immediately felt a drop in temperature. Not cold, just cooler than outside, like the shade of a cave. The floor was dirt and stone. I could see graffiti on the back wall, old names carved with knives, some dates going back to the 70s. A rusted lantern lay on its side near the wall. Its glass was cracked, the handle half missing. Next to it was a small pile of blackened rocks, probably an old fire pit. The whole place smelled faintly of dust, smoke, and old metal. I stepped inside. It wasn't deep, maybe 6 feet from the entrance to the back wall, but enough to feel enclosed. There were no windows, no cracks to the outside except the doorway. I turned slowly, taking in the carvings, the layers of ash in the pit, the way the stone ceiling had darkened from years of smoke. I squatted down to look closer at some of the carvings, mostly names, a few weird symbols I didn't recognize, a heart with initials in it, typical stuff. Then I heard it, a slow scrape. It wasn't loud, just a long, gritty dragging sound. I turned fast. The entrance had gone dark. At first, I thought maybe a shadow had passed, or some wind had kicked up sand across the opening, but then I heard another sound, duller, heavier, like weight pressing on stone. I moved toward the entrance, trying not to panic. The light outside was dimmer now, but I could still see the outline of the doorway. I reached it and pushed. Nothing happened. The air in the shelter suddenly felt warmer, tighter, like it was pressing in. I pushed again, harder. Still nothing. That's when I understood someone was outside. Not locking the door, it didn't have one, but just standing or leaning against the opening, blocking it with their weight. I didn't hear anything else. No breathing, no movement, no voices. Just silence. I didn't yell. I don't know why. Something about the silence made me stay quiet. It wasn't fear in the usual way. It was something else. A pressure in my chest, a warning in the back of my mind that told me to stay absolutely still. I stepped back from the entrance and stood in the middle of the shelter, barely 3 feet from the wall. I didn't breathe loud. I didn't move. I stared at the doorway, watching for shadows, for any flicker of movement that might give me a clue who was out there. Minutes passed. My watch ticked slow. I counted to 60, then again. Time blurred. I know at least 10 minutes went by. Probably more. My legs ached from standing still. My fingers tensed and unclenched around the straps of my pack. I thought about pulling the knife from my bag, but I didn't. I didn't want to make a sound. Then, without any signal or warning, the light shifted. The entrance was open again. Bright sunlight poured in like nothing had ever happened. No footsteps. No sound of retreat. Just open. I didn't wait. I bolted. I ran out of that shelter as fast as I could, stumbling over rocks, scraping my shins on thorn bushes, tripping on loose gravel. I didn't care. I didn't look back. I just moved. I followed the canyon rim east, heart pounding, lungs burning. The map in my head faded. I wasn't thinking about loops or return trails anymore. I just needed to get out. After about 20 minutes of fast hiking, I hit a ridgeline and saw the thin black line of the highway maybe 2 miles off. It ran like a ribbon across the desert floor, cars like dots. I adjusted course and headed for it. The terrain was rough, boulders, cactus, narrow washes, but I didn't slow down. My boots were cutting into my ankles, and my throat was dry. I was out of water, halfway there. Didn't matter. Just kept going. When I finally hit the shoulder of the road, I didn't stop walking. I stayed on the asphalt, heading toward the small pullout where I'd parked my car hours earlier. Took me nearly 45 minutes of road walking, but I made it. My car was exactly where I left it. No one was around. I unlocked it, got in, started the engine, and sat there, breathing, watching the road, watching the horizon. I kept expecting to see someone come up over the rise behind me, but no one ever did. I didn't report it. Who would I tell? There was no crime, no evidence. Nothing but that moment, that weight against the stone. I've thought about it a lot since. Who would be out there? Why would someone block the door like that? Maybe it was just a sick joke. Some drifter messing with hikers. Maybe they didn't mean anything by it. But that still doesn't explain how quiet they were. How long they waited. How I never heard a single footstep walk away. I never went back. I never marked the shelter's location on any map. I couldn't even if I wanted to. I wasn't tracking GPS that day. All I know is it was somewhere along the eastern rim of that canyon where the stone turns red and the land drops fast into shadow. If you ever hike out that way and see a shelter built into the wall, walk past it. Don't go in. And if you do, make sure no one's waiting for you to come back out. I camped deep in Olympic National Park last September. I had taken a week off work and decided to do a long, solo hiking trip. No particular trail in mind, just me, a topographic map, and my gear. I planned for 5 days out, with plenty of supplies, fuel, and layers. I parked my car at a ranger station, checked in, filled out the backcountry permit, and headed off. The first day was mostly uneventful. The weather was cool but dry, which is rare for the park that time of year. The trees were massive, moss hanging off every limb like old curtains. Everything smelled earthy and green. I hiked about 10 miles in, made camp by a stream, filtered water, made some freeze-dried food, and turned in by sunset. No cell signal, no people, just the sound of the forest and the occasional snap of twigs from who knows what moving around in the brush. On day 2, about 6 miles into my hike, I saw a tent pitched just off trail to the left. It was maybe 20 feet into the trees, almost hidden unless you were really paying attention. The color was what first caught my eye, a bright, solid blue. Not the muted forest green or camo most backpackers use. But what really made me stop was the size. It was tiny. Not just one person tiny, but like half that. At first I thought it might be a kid's play tent, something from a backyard. Maybe someone brought it as a joke or a marker for a trail meetup. It was low to the ground, dome-shaped, and the fabric was thin and shiny, like something you'd buy at a toy store. I didn't approach it. I slowed down, gave it a look, figured someone was just using it for gear storage or maybe taking a nap. But there was no sign of life, no pack outside, no cooking gear, no boots, nothing. Just this odd blue tent, zipped up tight and slightly sagging in the middle. I moved on. I didn't think about it much beyond a passing curiosity. The next 2 days were good. The trail was tough, but the forest was beautiful. I saw some elk, a few eagles, even a black bear way off in the distance, not interested in me at all. I followed the trail deeper in, set up camp in different spots each night, followed my route closely, made sure to leave no trace. The isolation was intense, but it was what I came for. No people, no internet, just trees and silence and time to think. On the 4th day, I turned around and started hiking back. I was planning to be out by early afternoon on day 5. I retraced my steps, same trail, same landmarks. When I got to the spot where I'd seen the blue tent, I paused. It was gone. That in itself wasn't strange. People pack up and leave all the time. But the area where it had been looked disturbed. The grass and leaves were pressed down into the shape of a circle, dirt visible in places where the foliage had been crushed. Like something heavy had sat there for a while. A ring of indentations where the base of the tent must have been. The odd part was it looked fresh. The imprint was still sharp, not weathered or smoothed out by wind or rain. No leaves had blown in to cover it, almost like the tent had been taken down that morning. I stopped and looked closer. That's when I noticed the granola wrapper. It was crumpled and half-tucked under a fern near the edge of the imprint. Same brand I had in my pack. Cliff Trail Mix Crunch, distinct red and orange wrapper. I knew I hadn't dropped it. I'm careful about trash. Always double-check before leaving a site. I pulled out my food bag to confirm. Sure enough, one of the bars was still sealed. Same flavor. Same batch code on the back. That bugged me. A lot. I looked around. I didn't hear anything, but the forest suddenly felt too quiet. Like even the birds had stopped. I didn't like standing still there. My back felt exposed. I didn't want to be watched, but that's exactly how I felt. I pocketed the wrapper, not sure why, and picked up the pace. That night, I camped earlier than usual. I found a small clearing a little uphill from the trail, tucked between 2 big fir trees. I didn't cook, just ate a cold protein bar and drank water. I kept my headlamp off as long as possible, not wanting to draw attention to myself. I felt on edge. I tried to reason through it. Maybe someone had the same granola bars. Maybe the tent belonged to a minimalist hiker or a kid. Maybe they'd just moved on. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been following me. Not right behind me, not visible, but close enough to know my route. to leave that wrapper, to pack up the tent just before I returned. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept waking up at every little noise, branches snapping, leaves rustling, the wind moving through the trees. At one point, maybe around 2 a.m., I thought I heard something heavy walking through the underbrush. 2 steps, then nothing. Then one more. Then silence. It could have been a deer. Could have been nothing. But I stayed still, barely breathing, for almost an hour. In the morning, everything looked normal. Birds were back, light filtered through the trees. I packed quickly and didn't stop for breakfast. I just wanted to get out. The last stretch of trail felt longer than I remembered. I checked behind me more than I should have. At one point, I thought I saw someone way back in the trees, just a dark shape between 2 trunks. But when I stopped to look directly, it was gone. I reached the ranger station by early afternoon. My car was untouched. Everything in it was just how I'd left it. I signed out on the permit sheet and started the drive home. The cell signal kicked in about 10 miles out, and I called a friend just to talk, just to hear someone's voice. I never told the rangers. What would I say? That someone pitched a toy-sized tent in the woods and left behind the same brand of granola bar I was carrying? That I felt watched for 2 nights? That I thought I saw someone but wasn't sure? But I still have the wrapper. I left it on the dash of my car for a while, just staring at it every morning on my way to work. I've never had anything like that happen again, and I've gone hiking plenty since. But now I always take a different trail back than the one I came in on. I don't stop near any odd campsites. And I never, ever eat that brand of granola bar again. I had been hiking solo through the Sawtooth Range in Idaho late September, trying to finish one of the longer loop trails before the weather turned. I had about 5 days worth of food in my pack, a small tent, water filter, and all the gear I needed. I'd planned this trip for months, studying maps, marking potential camp spots, and making sure I was ready for whatever the trail threw at me. I liked hiking alone. It was quiet, simple. Just me, the trail, the cold air, and the crunch of dirt under my boots. I'd done longer trips before, some even rougher, but this one still felt different from the start. The first day was beautiful. The air was crisp, sky cloudless. Golden leaves clung to aspen branches and lit up the valley in bursts of color. I made camp near a small alpine lake, cooked a hot meal, and fell asleep fast. No issues. The second day, as I climbed higher into the range, the wind picked up. It wasn't strong, but it had that dry, cold bite that warned you summer was definitely over. Around mid-afternoon, as I crossed through a denser patch of pine forest, I started hearing something strange. Faint sounds, hard to pin down. They came from the trees. It sounded like high-pitched yelling, distant, almost like someone shouting into a canyon and the echo carrying on forever. At first, I figured it had to be coyotes, maybe a group of them further down the valley. I'd heard them make some weird sounds before, whines, yips, almost human sometimes. I paused on the trail to listen. The moment I stopped moving, the sound stopped too. I stood still, holding my breath. Nothing, not even the wind in the trees. Then I kept walking, and after a few minutes, I heard it again. A rise and fall, like someone yelling from far away, then being cut off. The same pattern. I thought maybe it was just tricks of the wind, bouncing off the rocks in weird ways. I pushed it out of my mind and kept moving. That night, I set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by trees. I was tired from the elevation gain and wanted an early start the next day. I filtered water from a stream about 50 yards downhill and cooked a quick meal of freeze-dried pasta. As I ate, I scanned the forest. Nothing looked off. No tracks nearby, no broken branches. Just normal woods. But still, I had this tight feeling in my chest, like I'd forgotten something important or left a door unlocked. I crawled into my sleeping bag just after sunset and turned off my headlamp. The forest was pitch black. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. That's normal in the backcountry, but for some reason, I didn't sleep well. Every time I'd drift off, I'd wake up again thinking I heard something moving outside. At one point, I thought I heard that same faint yelling again, but it sounded farther away this time. Or maybe I was half dreaming it. The third day was rough. I was tired, dragging. My knees ached from all the downhill scrambling. The trail got narrow in places, clinging to the edge of a steep drop. The wind had picked up more, cold enough now that I kept my gloves and jacket on even while hiking. Around noon, I stopped to eat a protein bar. That's when I heard it again, screaming, but not distant. It sounded closer, maybe 100 feet behind me. I froze and turned around. The trail behind me was empty. Nothing moved. I stayed there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, listening, barely breathing. Then I walked forward again, slower now. 5 minutes later, there it was again. A scream, then silence. And this time I realized something that made my stomach drop. Every time I stopped walking, the sound stopped too. But when I moved again, it started back up. It was following me. I picked up my pace. No more breaks. I just wanted to get to my next campsite, set up, and get some rest. But the feeling that I wasn't alone kept growing. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something stepping out from the trees. But there was never anything there. By the time I reached my planned camp spot for the night, I was shaking. Not from the cold, but from something deeper. Fear, maybe. I didn't bother cooking. Just choked down a few handfuls of trail mix, unrolled my sleeping bag, and climbed inside fully clothed. I kept the headlamp next to my face and held my knife in my hand under the bag. I told myself it was just paranoia. I was tired, probably just my brain playing games with me. Sometime around midnight, I woke up in a sweat. My tent was cold, silent, but I knew I'd heard something. I turned on my headlamp. The beam lit up the orange walls of my tent. I didn't move for a while. Then I leaned forward, slowly, and unzipped the front just a crack. I peeked out. At first, I saw nothing. Then I heard it. A scream, high-pitched, short, just outside the ring of light from my headlamp. And then silence. I pulled back and sat frozen in place. It wasn't echoing from across the valley, like I thought. It wasn't coming from far away. It was just beyond the reach of my light, just outside my tent. I can't explain exactly why I reacted the way I did. It wasn't logical. I didn't think it through. Something in me just snapped. My body decided for me. I threw off my sleeping bag, unzipped the tent completely, and ran. No boots. No jacket. Just the thermal base layers I was sleeping in, and my headlamp bouncing wildly in front of me. I didn't even grab my pack. I didn't think about food or water. I didn't think about where I was going or how far. I just ran downhill, following the trail, legs pumping, lungs burning. I slipped on loose gravel, slammed my shoulder into a tree trunk, nearly fell more than once. But I didn't stop. Every time my feet pounded the ground, I thought I could hear another set of steps just behind me. And when I slowed, even for a second, I'd hear that scream again. Always behind me, always just out of reach. I ran for 6 miles straight before I saw a parked truck on a Forest Service road. I don't know whose it was. I didn't care. I hid in the woods near it until daylight. My breath fogged the cold air, and my shirt was soaked with sweat. My feet were cut up and bleeding. I crouched there for hours, shaking, watching the trees. When the sun finally came up, I walked the road until I reached a ranger station. I must have looked insane, no shoes, wild eyes, bleeding feet. I didn't tell them everything, just that I thought someone was following me. Maybe a poacher, maybe a weirdo. They gave me water, patched me up, and called a ride to take me back to my car. I never went back for my gear. I don't know what was out there. Probably just some lunatic messing around in the woods. Maybe someone stalking hikers for their own sick reasons. All I know is that whatever it wasn't an animal. It knew to stop when I stopped. It knew to stay just outside the light. It followed me for 3 days, and I haven't hiked alone since. I took a solo 4-day loop in Big Bend National Park at the end of October. The temperatures had finally dropped a little, and the summer crowds were gone. I planned my route carefully, 20 miles in, 8 miles across, and 12 back out, spaced evenly. I had done plenty of desert hikes before, but never one this remote. No service, no town close by. Just me, a paper map, and my pack. The first day was calm. I took my time getting started, left the car around 9 a.m., and walked through dry brush and stretches of dusty gravel. It was dead quiet except for wind and the occasional buzz of insects. Around 4:30, I stopped to rest at a small rise where I could see a bend in the trail curling downhill. That's when I saw him, a guy with a shaved head, wearing a bright red jacket, walking toward me on the trail. I figured he was just another hiker, maybe doing the loop in the opposite direction. We made eye contact briefly. I gave him a nod, just to be polite, but he didn't respond. Just kept walking past me, eyes fixed somewhere ahead. His face was unreadable, expressionless, like he wasn't really seeing me. Something about it sat wrong with me, but I shook it off. Some people are just weird in the woods. I set up camp a couple miles later. Basic stuff. Pitched my tent on flat ground, boiled some ramen, and sat listening to the wind. That night was uneventful. Cold enough to sleep in my fleece, but not freezing. Second day, around 3 p.m., I was coming around this low ridge and saw the guy again. Same jacket, same bald head. Again walking in the opposite direction. This time he was farther away, maybe 150 feet off, but clear as day. I stopped for a second, thinking maybe he'd looped around or turned back. But that made no sense unless he was doing some weird, personal route. I waved this time, hoping for a friendly gesture. Nothing. He walked right by without glancing my way. No backpack either, just the red jacket. That unsettled me more than it should have. Nobody hikes this stretch of Big Bend without gear. There's no water source for miles. You need to carry everything. I even turned and watched him walk out of sight behind the brush. For a minute I thought about calling out, but what would I say? Hey, where's your backpack? I told myself I was being paranoid. That night, I had trouble falling asleep. I kept thinking about how empty the park was, how if something went wrong out here, nobody would know. I kept the fly off my tent so I could see the stars. They were bright and beautiful, but didn't call me like they usually do. Every sound in the dark made me sit up, listening. Probably just wind again or small animals. Still, I kept the knife from my cook kit next to me in the tent. On the third day, I started moving early. I wanted to reach the last part of the loop before dark. The trail narrowed through some rocky patches, and I didn't see anyone all day, until, again, around 4 p.m., I spotted the guy. This time he was coming around a big rock formation, maybe 60 yards off. I stopped walking. He didn't. Still moving in the opposite direction. Still no backpack. Just that damn red jacket. Something about how steady and slow his steps were, almost robotic, sent a chill through me. I ducked behind a scrub bush and just watched him pass. He didn't turn, didn't pause. Just kept walking the same way he had every day. I waited until he was well out of sight before moving again. I camped early that night, choosing a spot against a rock face that gave some shelter from wind and a little cover. I didn't cook anything, just ate trail mix and jerky. My headlamp stayed off unless I absolutely needed it. I sat with my back to the rock for hours, just watching the dark. No fires, no light, nothing to draw attention. On the fourth day, I didn't see him at all. I started the final 12-mile stretch back to my car. Every couple of miles, I'd stop and look behind me, expecting him to appear. But he never did. I made it to my final campsite, a small clearing near a dry creek bed. I tried to tell myself it was fine. He probably finished his hike or turned off on another trail. But I couldn't shake the tension that had built up over the past few days. I ate something small and laid in my tent, fully dressed, just waiting for the sun to go down. I couldn't fall asleep. My ears were tuned to everything, the crunch of gravel, a twig snapping. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Around midnight, I got up to pee. I didn't use my headlamp, just let my eyes adjust. The moon gave me enough light to see where I was going. I walked about 30 feet from my tent, near the edge of some sparse trees, and that's when I saw him. Same red jacket, standing in the dark between two trees. Not walking this time, just standing, facing me, still. I don't know how long he'd been there. I didn't hear a single sound before I saw him. He wasn't moving. not even shifting his weight, just watching. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it. I didn't say anything. I just backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on him. He didn't follow. I reached my tent and went straight inside, didn't zip it, just grabbed everything and shoved it into my pack. I rolled the tent up with the pole still inside and clipped it to the outside of my pack. I had boots on already. I didn't bother with my stove or food bag, just left them. I hit the trail immediately. No headlamp, just moonlight. I knew the first few miles well enough and figured my eyes would adjust. My legs were shaky, but I pushed myself hard. I kept looking over my shoulder. Every time I thought I heard something behind me, I turned and saw nothing. No red jacket, just empty trail. I hiked 12 miles straight, no breaks. My feet were blistered, my throat dry, and my legs were screaming by mile 8. But I didn't stop. I didn't even think about stopping. I just kept going. Around 6 a.m., I saw the trailhead sign. My car was right where I left it. I unlocked it with shaking hands and threw my pack into the back seat. Then I sat there for 10 full minutes, trying to catch my breath, staring into the trees. I didn't see anyone on the drive out. Not a single car on the dirt road back to the main road. I went straight to the nearest gas station, used the bathroom, and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like hell. Dirt all over my face. Eyes bloodshot. I didn't sleep for a full day after that. I never reported it. I didn't know what to say. There was a guy in a red jacket who kept showing up without a backpack and stared at me in the woods. He didn't hurt me. He didn't speak. But something about him felt off in a way I still can't explain. I haven't gone back to Big Bend since. And now, even on local hikes, I find myself scanning the trail ahead and behind more than I used to, looking for a flash of red in the trees. I was hiking solo through New Hampshire's White Mountains late last September, trying to beat the cold before it really set in. The air was already crisp enough to sting a little when I breathed deep. Most of the tourists were gone by then, and the forest felt quiet in a way that made your ears strain for sounds. It wasn't the kind of silence that relaxed you, it was the kind that made you feel like you shouldn't be there. I wasn't doing one of the main trails, nothing crowded or popular. I'd looked at a few older topographic maps and pieced together a loop that followed some less maintained paths and a couple of old fire roads. I liked going where there wasn't much foot traffic. I liked the peace. At least, that's what I told myself. By the second day, I hadn't seen another person since I parked my truck. Just trees, rocks, and the slow sound of my own footsteps. Mid-morning, I was maybe 15 miles in, navigating a section where the trail narrowed and the undergrowth got thick. Leaves and dead pine needles blanketed the ground, making the dirt path hard to see in places. That's when I caught my toe on something. It felt like a root at first, thick and solid under my boot. I stumbled hard and nearly went down on my face. I turned around to see what I'd tripped on. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual, just more of the same. Damp ground, tangled brush, patches of moss. But when I looked closer, I saw a thin, faded strip of fabric sticking out from the dirt. It was olive green, maybe an inch wide, with frayed edges. I crouched and brushed away some leaves. It was a strap. Looked like it belonged to a backpack. That stopped me. There was no trail marker around, no campsite. Just woods. I looked around instinctively, scanning the tree line. Nothing. No tents. No packs hanging from branches. No people. I dug a little more just with my hands. The ground was soft, full of mulch and rotted leaves. A few inches down, I hit something bulky. It was a rolled-up sleeping bag. Old and damp, but still intact. It was folded tightly and zipped. I remember staring at it, waiting for it to give me some kind of clue, but it just sat there like it had been forgotten for years. Next to it, partially buried under more debris, were a pair of hiking boots. Faded brown leather, one missing a lace. One of them had a dirty sock stuffed deep inside. No bones. No ID. No wallet or name tag, or anything that might have told me who had left the stuff behind. I stood up and backed off a few steps. My brain was trying to make sense of it. Why would someone bury their gear out here? Or had it just gotten covered naturally over time? But it didn't look like it had been randomly dropped. It was too compact, too neatly rolled and placed. Someone had taken time to put it there. I took a picture with my phone and marked the location on my GPS just to be safe. I stared at it a few more seconds, then kept moving. I didn't want to, but I told myself there was no sign of an emergency. It wasn't like I'd found a body. Still, it sat heavy in my chest for the rest of the day. That night, I made camp a few miles further up, near an old fire road that barely showed up on my map. The air dipped below freezing. I built a small fire, cooked a meal, but I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that sleeping bag, zipped up and buried like a coffin. When I got back to my truck 2 days later, the first thing I did was head to the ranger station. I told them exactly what I'd found, showed them the photo, gave them the GPS coordinates. The ranger I spoke to was maybe in his 50s, gray hair under a weathered cap. He looked at the photo and frowned. I expected him to pull out a missing persons report or start making calls, but he didn't. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and scratched his jaw. He said that part of the trail had been officially closed off for years. Washed out in a storm, he said, too dangerous to maintain. Most maps didn't even show it anymore. I told him that's where I'd found the gear. He nodded slowly, then told me they'd check it out, but he didn't seem surprised. Said hikers sometimes dumped old equipment when it got too heavy, or when they panicked. Maybe someone had gotten lost and left it behind. Maybe they'd found their way out and never came back for it. But he didn't mention any names. No cases. No reports. Nothing about a hiker going missing in that area. I left feeling like I'd walked into someone else's unfinished story. A chapter that had been written and buried out there in the woods, with no clear beginning or end. The ranger's calm attitude stuck with me, too. Like he'd seen it before. Like this kind of thing happened more than people realized. When I got home, I did some digging online. Looked through missing persons reports from the area, forums, even old newspaper archives. I didn't find anything that matched. Not the location, not the description, not even a clue. I still have the picture on my phone. Sometimes I stare at it, trying to figure out what it means. A rolled sleeping bag, boots, a sock. No bones, no ID, just enough to make you wonder. Part of me thinks it really was just abandoned gear. But the way it was buried, it didn't look random. It looked placed, hidden. Maybe the person made it out. Maybe they didn't. Maybe someone else put it there. I don't know. But I haven't gone hiking alone since. Not because I'm scared of ghosts or legends or anything like that. It's because there are real stories out there that never get told. Real people who disappear and don't leave behind enough for anyone to ask questions. And sometimes, when you trip over something in the woods, it's not a root. It's a piece of a story someone didn't want found.